Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Words to live by. Hey folks, Steve here, and if you've been following along with our videos recently, particularly our last one, if you haven't watched it, I encourage you to do so. We're talking about Sabbath and how that fits into and integrates into our way of living. The broad picture that we're looking at is that your way of life, your life system, it gets you the results that you're getting in your life. If you're busy and burned out and exhausted and tired, well, it's not so much just the stuff going on around you, but it is how you're living your life, the good life that God gave you to live. And so Sabbath, I think, is an important part of learning to live in God's rhythm and His way of being a human. So in the last video, we talked about this idea that comes from Jesus. The Sabbath was made for human beings, and that human beings were not made for the Sabbath. Sabbath is not simply something that you must obey, or if you don't, you're going to hell. No, Sabbath is a gift that God gives you for your healing. It is a gift that He gives you in which you can experience His presence and His power. 6 days you shall labor, but the seventh is a Sabbath day to the Lord. The seventh is a day of stopping, of resting, of delighting in Him, and of worshiping Him. Now, of course, how you actually do that comes with all sorts of problems and challenges, right? When you start to look at the details of that. And you can see, I think, why the Pharisees in the first century got into the challenges with Jesus that they did, was particularly as it related to Sabbath. Because they wanted to keep and honor this command, they just ran into trouble with how they actually did it and got very legalistic and very rigid with it in some respects. So one of the challenges that we would face with any kind of spiritual practice or spiritual discipline or spiritual activity is that we forget that they are just means to an end and not the end themselves. This is why I like the language that John Wesley uses, 18th century founder of Methodism. He referred to spiritual disciplines, spiritual practices as means of grace. They're means of grace. These are channels or conduits or activities in which the goal, the objective, is the receiving of God's power in our lives to do what we couldn't do on our own through direct effort. I mean, these are means, not the end. The end is God. The end is a deeper union with Him and conformity to Christ's likeness. These are just the means. The challenge in the spiritual life, really in all of life, is to think that the goal itself is keeping the practice. The goal is Sabbath. The goal is Bible reading. The goal is going to church on Sunday. Right? When those are only ever the means to the end. All important, don't mishear me, and indeed sometimes essential, but they're the means to the end, not the end themselves. So in order to help us kind of frame how we actually keep Sabbath and some ideas for you in your life, I want to work through the fourfold definition of Sabbath. That you translate the Hebrew word Shabbat essentially means four things: stopping, resting, delighting, and worshiping. But the first thing that I'll say is this. Now, Sabbath and how you keep that, it's going to be very dependent on your circumstance, your situations, and where you are in life. When you look at the two places this command is given, the two places the Ten Commandments are given, in Exodus 20 and in Deuteronomy 5, you'll realize that the text of this particular command is slightly different in both situations. Now, part of the reason why, I think, is that, and other scholars think too, this isn't just my opinion, right, is that this command is given to different people in different times. In Exodus 20, it's given to people who had just come out of slavery, God's people who had just come out of slavery in Egypt. In Deuteronomy 5, it's given to God's people who are getting ready to enter the promised land, about 40 years apart. Different generations, different circumstances, different people. And so here's like a broad and important general point, right, is that how you keep the Sabbath and really how you live life generally and broadly, right, will depend very much on who you are, your circumstance, your life stage, your season of life, where you are, right? So it's going to look different. Again, it's about obedience to the spirit of the law, not focusing your obedience to the letter of the law. There's some nuance there, but that's part of what it means to grow in maturity in Christ. Okay. So, fourfold definition of Sabbath. How can that help to frame this idea of how we keep Sabbath? So, a 24-hour period of rest. Typically, I mean, the Jewish model is from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. For many followers of Jesus, this came to be the Lord's Day, taken from either sundown Saturday or from very early Sunday morning through Sunday evening, where worship became a critical and essential part of that. So whatever day you take it, I don't think it's that important personally. I mean, Colossians 2:16, Paul talks about that idea. Go look it up if you want to, and you're into that sort of thing. That's my footnote. But whatever day you keep it, a 24-hour period of rest, right, where you're not working. So stopping, that's what it means to stop. To cease your labor, right? To stop working. It means that you're not going to do paid work, but it also means, I think, that you don't do unpaid work either. It means, save the laundry for another day. Do it another day. It means do your grocery shopping a different day. It means do the dishes a different day. I mean, you can put stuff in the dishwasher or wash dishes. I think that's totally up to you, I guess. You and the Lord, work that out. But the idea is that you're stopping. That for one day at least, you remember that you are not God, that you can stop laboring, stop working, and the world keeps spinning. Of course, the challenge that comes along with that is that there is a lot of cultural pressure that says that's not true. That if you stop working, then everything's going to fall apart. That if you stop laboring, then everything will collapse around you. But of course, that's why this is so important, is because you are not God, and we do not live in a world of many gods. We live in a world with one God and one Lord, and we need to remember that we are not Him. That's stopping. Resting is hard for us. That's why what's really cool for me is in the Jewish practice of Sabbath, the Jewish conception of time really, the day begins at sundown of the day prior. So the Sabbath day begins Friday at sundown, and it ends Saturday at sundown, which means that it's usually started with like a celebratory meal, a feast, and then after that it was sleep, right? The Sabbath itself, beginning with sleep, I think is extremely important in helping us frame. This is a day of rest. This is a day of rest. You need to sleep. You need to rest. You need to slow down enough and just let yourself breathe. Andy Crouch said that Sabbath is glad contemplation of work well done. To me, I think of it as like that feeling after you've done like a lot of really hard work, whatever it may be, whether it's like yard work. I don't really like yard work, so that's maybe not applicable to me. Or like you've done stuff around the house, maybe cleaning a bunch of stuff, or you finally put together that bookshelf that you should have done a long time ago, but then you finally do it. And it's like that feeling when the work is done and you can just sit back and just rest. The challenge with that is that it's very hard for many of us because there's that fear of who am I if I'm not working? Who am I if I'm not producing? Well, that's the gift too, is that you are still loved. You are held and cared for by God. Stopping and resting. The third point is delighting. The third kind of essential definition of Sabbath is delighting. Dan Allender said that Sabbath is an invitation to enter into delight. It's a day that we look forward to all week. It's a day that the rest of the week that we remember how good it was. Delight. That on the Sabbath you do things that you enjoy doing, right? Do stuff you enjoy. Be around people that you enjoy as much as possible. There are people who are absolutely draining in your life. Maybe avoid them for a day. I mean, some nuance there, but it's a day of delight. Do stuff you enjoy. Eat food that you enjoy. Drink drinks that you enjoy. It's a day of delight. For us, like usually on Sabbath, we start the morning with like a really good breakfast, and I don't get out of my bathrobe until much later than I would on any other day of the week, right? Delight. And of course, the challenge here is that you may in fact feel guilty if you try to delight. Because we've been raised, so many of us in a tradition that says, no, this is all about self-denial. Now, self-denial is important, but there's a balance between feasting and fasting. There must be. If your life is nothing but fasting, nothing but self-denial, and there's no feasting, there's no delight and celebration, then you're going to be out of alignment with God's heart and God's will. If your life is all feasting and no fasting, then likewise, your life will be out of alignment with God's will. The last one is worship. And when I say worship, I don't necessarily mean, singing like songs, though that may be part of it. And though corporate worship may in fact be part of your Sabbath practice as well, especially if you try to keep it on Sunday, I would encourage you to do that in some way. But part of worship is really an entire life orientation to placing worth and value on God and on his kingdom. Stop, rest, delight, worship. Walter Brueggemann said that people who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently. So the encouragement for you this week is to keep the Sabbath. Do a little work if you need to figure out what that might look like in your life, in your context, in your life stage, with your age, and the amount of kids or lack of kids or family or friends around you in your life, whatever that may be. Take a little bit of time. Try to figure out what that might look like. And then the encouragement is just do it. The challenge that I think a lot of us run into is that we feel like this is a good thing that we might want to try. You know, I know for me, I have this deep sense this would be something that my soul really would benefit from. This would be good for my kids, for my family, for my relationships. It would benefit all of my life, right? But then, of course, the challenge is that we just don't do it. For whatever reason, we just find it so hard to actually execute. So my encouragement to you is just do it. Take the 24 hours. Keep the Sabbath day. If you say, no, I can't take 24 whole hours. You don't know my job. You don't know my... Well, start somewhere then. And I'd really encourage you, though, to take the 24. But if that's really hard for you, start somewhere. Start small and just begin to practice as you can. That's all we got for today, folks. Know that I'm praying for you. If you like what you saw here, please do comment, like, share it, subscribe to the channel, do all that fun stuff. It's helpful for our channel. Hopefully it's helpful for you and your friends and family as well. I encourage you in that. I think that's all I have to say. If there's any other stuff that you need to know, like links, you can find all that probably in the info below this post, I hope. Otherwise, y'all take care. Have a great week. Take some time to Sabbath. Make a great day. And we'll see you next time.